What's going on, y'all? My name is Tommy. Welcome back to the channel. Time for another episode of Min-Maxing for Fun and Profit. Today, coming again. That would have popped real good on Ding the Bell. God damn it. Once again today, digging out the Dark Archive playtest, the Thaumaturge, jack of all trades and master of most. If you're liking what you're seeing, remember to like, subscribe, go back like 10 seconds in this video. There was a really good crack of the knuckles to ding the bell. Stay caught up on all your stuff. Remember that patronage at any tier gets you a Google Sheet with all the math and things figured out for this build and a billion other 1A2 and Starfinder builds. We actually have a couple holes in 2nd edition games coming around if you would be interested in Homebrew, Ancient Osirion, or the Strength of Thousands adventure path. But we're not worried about that right now. For now, well, let's dive in. Okay, so the Thaumaturge is a lot of things. Truly, this seems to be a very go-wide, jack-of-all-trades, master of most kind of thing at first glance, which off the cuff makes it very interesting and unique in its own right. The big thing that it wants to do is its esoterica ability, essentially having a bunch of like random scraps and bits and bobs and things, which it leverages against the bad guy for value. Find Flaws is the bread and butter of our class. Once per round for one action, you recall knowledge about a creature. We use our charisma instead of our usual ability modifier for the skill being used to recall knowledge. The creature you're recalling knowledge against must either be one you're looking at or one you're investigating in advance. On a critical success, you learn all of the creature's resistances, weaknesses, and immunities. If you would have learned any of them already from recall knowledge, you learn different things instead. Then you can use the next ability, which we'll get to in a second, Esoteric Antithesis, for free. On a success, you learn the creature's highest weakness, if any, and then can again Antithesis for free. On a failure, you can try again, essentially using Esoteric Antithesis. Again, on a critical failure, you're flat-footed until the beginning of your next turn and cannot use Esoteric Antithesis this round, as you just make a big giant mistake, essentially. That ability, Esoteric Antithesis, allows you to dig through your like pouch of esoteric bric-a-brac and then get a bunch of stuff which you can use for value against the bad guys. Your unarmed and weapon strikes against whatever you're attacking become magical if they weren't already, and you cause them to apply one of the creature's weaknesses, even if they don't deal fire damage for an arboreal, say. If the creature has a weakness with the value of 2 plus half your level or higher, set the type of weakness to the creature's highest weakness. Otherwise, it's a custom weakness with a value equal to 2 plus half your level, which applies only to your strikes, which obviously stacks up quite a lot in a world where essentially that weakness would be doubled when we're critting with our strikes. On top of that, all Thaumaturges get a multitude of implements. Probably the thing I like the least about the class so far, in and of just the fact that, well, they seem to do what other classes do and none of them feel incredibly unique, but I know more are coming, and as you level, you choose multiple and advance certain ones that you have. For said implements, we will be starting with the weapon implement, which has to be a one-handed weapon because of later abilities we get that we'll talk about in a second. This also gives us the implement's interruption reaction, which is essentially attack of opportunity, but only against the thing that you're benefiting from Esoteric Antithesis against. This eventually levels up such that you do extra damage on failures and can disrupt actions on regular hits instead of just critical hits. We will also be taking the Lantern for our second implement, because a +1 status bonus to checks to recall knowledge against creatures within 20 feet and in the bright light shining from your lantern just seems like a no-brainer. And then lastly, the Chalice implement, giving us the drink from the Chalice action. Once per round, you can take a tiny sip to get temp HP equal to 2 plus half your level. You can also spend an action to give this to an adjacent ally, or just drain the thing, which will refresh in 10 minutes to get 3 HP for each level you have. Easy peasy. Essentially what we're looking at building here today is a very high damaging martial with a lot of like tech in its back pocket to pivot and the ability to identify monsters, sort of like an investigator, but a little more spooky and with a little more damage in the form of implements empowerment. When you strike, you trace mystic patterns on the bad guys and do 2 extra damage, tracing light with a lantern and then like cut along the dots, I guess. I don't know. Flavor to taste, kids. Today we are building, of course, a gnome. The bonus to Constitution and Charisma, as well as a bunch of their ancestry feats, are kind of right up our alley. The strength flaw kind of sucks, but it's okay. Gnomish lore is right up the alley of what we're trying to do as a Thaumaturge, collect random bits and bobs. It makes so much sense to me. Feybound for our background, because the Phase Fortune action to re-roll a skill check when we're basically as skill-based as the investigator, if not more, Again, bread and butter. We'll want to begin play with a strength of 14, which isn't great, but remember you're applying weaknesses and getting extra damage, so like that balances out. A dex of 10, a con of 14, an int of 10, a whiz of 12, and a charisma of 18. Again, this build will be single class because I want to see exactly how many things from Thaumaturge I want to take as opposed to archetyping out. At level 1, we'll grab Scroll Thaumaturgy, which lets you activate scrolls of any magical tradition using your Thaumaturge class DC for the scroll's DC rather than a spell DC. If the spell is on the list for multiple traditions you chose, which tradition you choose at the time that you activate the thing. You know, for even more diversity, if we can't run up to the thing and slap it with our gnomish flick mace. Yo-yo of death, I suppose. Esoteric Warden at 2nd level. When you find flaws and succeed the Recall Knowledge check, you also get a status bonus to your AC against the creature's next attack and a +1 status bonus to your next save against the creature, which goes to a 2 on a critical success, and is pretty good when, you know, everything's trying to attack us because we're trying to attack everything. Then at 4th level, we saw this on the Witch in the Witch playtest. That's probably why I'm still taking it, because I really want this to be a thing. Draw Warding Circle. We spend 1 minute constructing a circle along the edges of a 10-foot burst using materials you've identified with Esoteric Antithesis that will like hurt the bad thing. Anyone except the bad thing in question can cross the circle without trouble, but the chosen creature must attempt a will save against your class DC when it attempts to do so. On a failure, the chosen creature remains on the same side. The action is disrupted. Creatures other than the chosen creature can burn their turn to scuff the circle. I still just really like this ability as a very effective in small rooms battlefield control, especially because eventually that flick mace we're going to be grabbing has reach, so we can swing over the line they can't cross and get some attacks in without as much fear of reprisal. 10 rounds to set it up kind of sucks, but if I'm honest, if you set yourself up well enough, you should be able to do that before a lot of encounters. You just need a party that doesn't want to kick down the door screaming blood for the blood god at the top of their voice. Next up, it's a weird one. Rule of 3. For 1 action, once per round, if you're benefiting from your antithesis, you can see the subject and you haven't found flaws. Every time you spend an action once per round to do this, the effect gets better and better, and it lasts as long as the creature is subject to your antithesis. Nothing happens on the first utterance. On the second utterance, it's a +1 status bonus to attack rolls. On the third utterance, so 3 rounds on, the status bonus to attack rolls against the creature increases to +2, and the creature becomes flat-footed to you. Real good if they're stuck on the other side of a circle of salt or glass or whatever you had to grab, right? I'm gonna assume there are other damage-dealing characters in your party, so against like bosses and things, if you want to just hang back and rule of 3 up, you make a very good like second half of the boss fight charge in with this ability. I think it's really cool. Gonna go ahead and take the Duelist Dedication now, to eventually grab Duelist's Challenge and get a circumstance bonus on our damage as well. Given that all of our other damage boosts are either untyped or in the form of weaknesses, it should stack real good, but we're not taking the challenge quite yet. We'll take Twin Weakness next for 2 actions. If you're holding an implement and a weapon, we probably are, and the subject of your Esoteric Antithesis is within reach of both, make a melee strike against the subject of your antithesis on any attack roll result but a crit fail. You also press your lantern into them and apply the weakness from Esoteric Antithesis. This is in addition to any damage from your strike, including the weakness it applies. 2 attacks for the map and essentially getting double weakness, which is really cool. Quick Circle next will let us salt as you fly, keep the devil on that side of the door so we can attack him over the course of a 3-action activity instead of 10 rounds, or, you know, playable in much more senses. Then Shared Warding to pass out our status bonus to AC and saves from Esoteric Warden to all of our friends within 30 feet. Then Duelist's Challenge, followed by Implement's Assault. For 3 actions, make a strike with your weapon against each foe within 30 feet of you. Don't increase the map until after making all the attacks. If your weapon is a melee weapon and any of the attacks are outside your reach, you release the weapon before the strikes and it returns to your grasp after all of them. If your hands are full when the weapon returns, it clatters to the ground. As normal, your weapon requires 1 more action to reload, blah blah blah. Essentially, big giant whirlwind attack for when there are too many monsters late game. Then Ubiquitous Antithesis, because it's hard to say basically, and to pass out our antithesis invisibility to all of our friends within 30 feet. For our ancestry feats, the real reason we're playing in Gnome, and yes, if you're on my Twitter, I needed to ask who was best to recall knowledge for a reason. Theoretical acumen. It's a free action once per day when you succeeded a skill check to recall knowledge to identify a creature, aka when we do exactly what we want to do. Once before the end of your next turn, you can use the skill modifier from the triggering check in place of a save, in place of a perception to seek, in place of your deception to feint, or in place of intimidation to demoralize, or you could use, say, like your nature DC in place of your AC. This seems real good, because I assume that we're going to be able to outrun a lot of these abilities with our skill checks, the things we want to do and the things we want to pump into. So being able to drop my Arcana into my reflex save, right, it writes itself. Next, we'll take Gnome Weapon Familiarity. It gets us trained with the glaive and the kukri, but more importantly, it gets us access to the Gnome Flick Mace. Big damage dice on a one-handed reach weapon. It also feels really esoteric to essentially beat someone to death with a dire yo-yo. Then Vivacious Conduit. If you rest for 10 minutes, you gain HP equal to your con mod times half your level. Cumulative with any treat woundsing or drinking from the chalice or like clerics or what have you. And after that, we'll grab Life Leap. For one action, you can phase through a living creature you're adjacent to appear on the other side of it, which should make it arbitrarily easy to get a flank off. And since we like to do a lot of damage, the flank seems like a foregone conclusion for us. And then lastly, Homeward Bound to twice per week, plane shift only to the first world and back. It's only fair at this point. You got the background that interacts with the Fae. You should also hand your GM a vehicle to take you to whatever Fae you made a deal with so you can wrap the campaign up in style. Am I right? Then for the general feats, it's armor proficiency for big heavy armor, then toughness diehard, incredible initiative, canny acumen for the reflex. Okay, so said all that to say this, the Thaumaturge looks really cool, and like, I don't think it necessarily outruns like a rogue or a magus in terms of I do a lot of damage on the class, but it does have a lot of weirdly stackable, buffable things that I at least feel are very few and far between in this system. I love being able to slam a weakness down on something because that number will multiply real easy. But that said, the implements, like I said, feel very like, let's take this thing someone else does and just kind of make it occult flavored. Like there's definitely a reaction that feels like a champion reaction. What we have feels like attack of opportunity. There's gonna be more. I'm looking forward to them. As I look at the Thaumaturge now, it feels very like 2/3 of a class. But I do like that there is an occult martial at the table. No spell casting here. This definitely feels a lot like what the 1E occultist was trying to do, but a little less complicated. That's like the one class in 1E. I'm still like, what do you do? I've GM'd for an occultist off and on for a couple years, and I'm still just scratching my head real hard. But that's all the time I have. Are we rolling up playtest Thaumaturges? Which is your favorite implement? Let me know in the comments. Next week, something in Guns and Gears. I don't know. There's so much in that book. We'll figure it out. But till then, friends, we'll see you next time. I also want to take this moment really quickly at the end of the video to extend a heartfelt congratulations to the members of United Paizo Workers. Congratulations on making tabletop role-playing game history and taking the first steps to forming your first union. Let me say here officially that I truly hope Paizo quickly and of their own volition recognizes your right to unionize, because after all, 8 hours for exploration mode, 8 hours for downtime mode, and 8 hours for what we will. We live in exciting times.